My son Marcus threw me out of his house last Christmas saying, "Mom, you're broke and embarrassing." He had no idea I was sitting on a $12 million secret that would change everything. The look on his face when he found out was priceless. I still remember that cold December evening like it was yesterday. I was sitting at Marcus's dinner table in Detroit, watching my son's wife Jessica serve everyone except me. The smell of roasted turkey filled the air, but my plate remained empty. My two grandchildren, Emma and Jake, kept glancing at me with confused eyes, wondering why Grandma wasn't eating with the family. "Mom," Marcus said without looking up from his perfectly carved turkey, "we need to talk after dinner." His voice carried that familiar tone of disappointment that I'd grown accustomed to over the past few years. Jessica rolled her eyes and whispered something to her sister about the burden. I sat there in my old wool sweater, the same one I'd worn for 3 Christmases in a row, and nodded quietly. They all assumed I couldn't afford new clothes. They assumed I was living paycheck to paycheck in my tiny studio apartment on the east side. They assumed wrong. After dinner, Marcus led me to a study. The room smelled of expensive leather and his imported cigars. He sat behind his mahogany desk like he was conducting a business meeting, not talking to the woman who raised him. "Mom, this isn't working anymore," he began, shuffling through some papers. "You're struggling financially, and frankly, it's embarrassing when our friends come over and see you in those old clothes asking us for money." I never asked him for money, not once, but I let him continue. "Jessica and I have discussed this, and we think it would be best if you found your own place to spend the holidays from now on. Maybe look into some senior communities or something. We can't keep supporting you like this." The words hit me like ice water, but I kept my expression neutral. Marcus had no idea that just that morning, I had received a quarterly statement showing my portfolio had grown to $12.3 million. He had no idea that the struggling woman sitting in front of him owned 3 apartment buildings, had stock in major companies, and could buy his suburban house 20 times over. "I understand, Marcus," I said simply, standing up from the leather chair. "I'll get my coat." As I walked out of that house, I heard Jessica telling the children, "Grandma needs to learn to take care of herself now." 8-year-old Emma started crying, saying she wanted to give me her Christmas cookies, but Marcus quickly distracted them with their new video games. That night, alone in my modest apartment, I made a decision that would change everything. You see, Marcus never knew the real story about his father and me. When my husband David died 15 years ago, Marcus was too busy with college and his new girlfriend to pay attention to the will reading or the business arrangements. He assumed we were just a middle-class family who'd lost their breadwinner. What Marcus didn't know was that David had been a brilliant investor. Starting in the 1980s, he quietly bought properties all around Detroit when everyone else was selling. He invested in tech companies before anyone knew what the internet would become. He purchased stocks that would later split and multiply beyond our wildest dreams. When David passed, I inherited everything, but I also inherited his wisdom about money. Never let people know how much you have, Helen. It changes how they treat you. So I lived simply. I drove my old Honda, shopped at thrift stores, and lived in a basic apartment. But every month, I watched my accounts grow. I had financial advisors managing my investments from a downtown office. I owned rental properties that brought in steady income. I had more money than Marcus would earn in 5 lifetimes. The night after Christmas, I sat at my kitchen table with all my financial documents spread out before me. Bank statements showing millions, property deeds, stock certificates, investment portfolios. All of it meant for Marcus and his children someday. But his words kept echoing in my mind. "You're broke and embarrassing." That's when I picked up the phone and called my lawyer, Patricia Morrison. Despite it being late in the evening, she answered immediately. Patricia had been handling my affairs for over a decade. "Helen, is everything all right?" "Patricia, I need to make some changes to my will, major changes." "Of course. What did you have in mind?" I took a deep breath. "I want to remove Marcus and his family as beneficiaries, all of it." There was silence on the other end. Patricia had watched Marcus grow up, had seen him at family gatherings over the years. "Helen, that's over $12 million we're talking about. Are you sure about this?" I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Over the next few weeks, I did something I'd never done before. I started really looking around my neighborhood, my community, and seeing where my money could actually make a difference. There was Maria, the single mother who lived 2 floors below me. She worked double shifts at the hospital and was studying to become a nurse while raising 3 kids alone. I'd often hear her crying at night, worried about how she'd pay for her textbooks or her children's school supplies. There was the Thompson family down the street, whose teenage son had been accepted to MIT but couldn't afford to go. His parents worked multiple jobs, but still couldn't scrape together enough for tuition. There was the community center where I volunteered on Tuesdays, serving lunch to seniors who had no family to check on them. The center was always struggling for funding, always having to cut programs that kept lonely elderly people connected and fed. And then there was Emma's school. My granddaughter attended an underfunded public school where teachers spent their own money on supplies, and the music program had been canceled due to budget cuts. For the first time in years, I felt excited about my money. Instead of it being something that would eventually go to a son who saw me as a burden, it could actually help people who were struggling through no fault of their own. I spent hours with Patricia restructuring everything. We set up trusts for Maria and her children. We created a scholarship fund for deserving students like the Thompson boy. We established endowments for the community center and several other local charities. We even set up a fund for Emma and Jake's school, specifically for programs that Marcus had complained were unnecessary expenses. The irony was delicious. Marcus thought I was broke, but I was quietly becoming one of the most significant philanthropists in our area. Meanwhile, Marcus was having problems of his own that I only learned about later. His insurance business, which he'd always bragged about, was struggling. He'd made some poor investment choices and had taken out loans against his house. Jessica's shopping habits had gotten out of control, and they were carrying significant credit card debt. In February, about 2 months after he'd kicked me out, Marcus called me. It was the first time I'd heard from him since Christmas. "Mom, we need to talk about something." His voice sounded different, strained, worried. "What's wrong, Marcus?" "Well, it's financial. Jessica and I are going through a rough patch, and I was wondering, I know you don't have much, but do you have anything saved? Maybe something Dad left that we didn't know about?" I almost laughed out loud. Here was my son, who had called me broke and embarrassing, asking me for money. The same son who had thrown me out of his house was now hoping I might have some secret savings to help him. "Marcus, you said I was struggling financially. You said I was a burden." I know. I shouldn't have said those things. It's just, we're really in trouble here, Mom. The business is failing, and we might lose the house. The kids don't know yet, but... For just a moment, I felt my heart soften. These were my grandchildren he was talking about, Emma and Jake, who had nothing to do with their father's cruelty. "How much trouble are you in?" "We need about 50,000 to get back on track. I know it's a lot to ask, and I know you probably don't have it, but I thought maybe." $50,000? I made more than that in investment returns every month. I could have written him a check without even noticing the dent in my accounts. "I'm sorry, Marcus. I don't have that kind of money." The silence on the phone was deafening. "Right, of course. I'm sorry I asked. I just thought, never mind." After he hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling a complex mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to help him, not because he deserved it, but because Emma and Jake deserved better. But another part of me remembered his words, "Just die already so we can get this over with." Words he'd whispered to Jessica, but that I'd overheard during one of my visits. In April, I had what the doctors called a minor cardiac episode. It wasn't a heart attack, but it was serious enough to land me in the hospital for a week. The doctor said it was likely stress-related, combined with my age. I called Marcus from the hospital, thinking that maybe this health scare would remind him that I was still his mother, still a human being who deserved basic love and respect. "Mom, you're in the hospital?" "Yes, Marcus. I had some chest pains, and the doctors want to keep me for observation." "Oh, well, do you need anything?" "I just thought you should know." "Right. Well, I'm sure you're fine. You're tough. Listen, Mom, I'm actually in the middle of something important right now. Can I call you back?" He never called back. I spent a week in that hospital with only the nurses and my neighbor Maria checking on me. Maria brought me flowers from her garden and sat with me for hours, even though she barely knew me. She told me about her dreams of becoming a pediatric nurse, about how she wanted to help children who were scared in hospitals, just like her youngest daughter had been when she'd had appendicitis. That's when I knew I'd made the right decision about my will. On my last day in the hospital, I asked Patricia to visit me. We finalized all the remaining details of my new estate plan. Marcus and his family were completely removed. The money would go to people like Maria, to organizations that actually helped people, to causes that mattered. Helen, Patricia said as she packed up the documents, have you thought about what happens when Marcus finds out about all this? He'll find out when I'm gone. By then, it won't matter what he thinks. But what if something happens and you want to change your mind? I looked out the hospital window at the Detroit skyline, thinking about my son who couldn't spare an hour to visit his mother in the hospital. I won't change my mind. Summer came and went without a word from Marcus. I learned from Maria, who had become a dear friend, that he and Jessica had managed to avoid foreclosure by borrowing money from her parents. They'd also taken Emma and Jake out of their private school and enrolled them in the same public school that would soon benefit from my anonymous donation. In September, I decided to test something. I wanted to know if Marcus cared about me as a person at all, or if I was truly just an inconvenience he was waiting to be rid of. I called him and told him I was thinking about moving to Florida. It was partially true. I had been considering buying a condo in Tampa where the weather would be better for my health. Florida? That's great, Mom. Really great. You'll love the weather down there. His enthusiasm was unmistakable. He was thrilled at the idea of me moving 1,000 miles away. I was hoping you and the kids might visit me sometimes, I said, testing him further. Oh, well, you know how expensive flights are these days, and the kids have school and activities, but maybe we could work something out. We both knew he had no intention of visiting me in Florida or anywhere else. That conversation was the last straw. I called Patricia one final time to make absolutely sure my will was ironclad. Every penny would go to people who would use it to better their lives and help others. Marcus would get a letter explaining my decision, but not a single cent. In October, I did move to Florida. I bought a beautiful condo overlooking the Gulf of Mexico and settled into a community where people didn't judge you by your old clothes or assume you were poor because you drove a modest car. I made new friends, volunteered at local charities, and for the first time in years, I felt genuinely happy. Marcus never called to see if I'd arrived safely. He never asked for my new address. As far as he was concerned, I had simply disappeared from his life, which was exactly what he wanted. 2 years passed peacefully in Florida. I was healthier, happier, and surrounded by genuine friends who cared about me as a person. I'd secretly funded Maria's nursing degree, and she had graduated with honors. The Thompson boy was thriving at MIT. The community center back in Detroit had expanded their programs and was serving twice as many seniors. Then, in November, I received an unexpected phone call. Grandma Helen? It was Emma, now 12 years old. Somehow she had tracked down my phone number. Emma, sweetheart, how did you find me? I asked Mrs. Patterson next door. She had your number from when you lived here. Grandma, I miss you so much. Dad said you moved away because you didn't want to see us anymore, but I don't believe that. My heart broke. Marcus had told his children that I had abandoned them, when the truth was the opposite. Oh, honey, I miss you too. I miss you every single day. Can I come visit you? Mom and Dad have been fighting a lot, and everything is scary here. I just want to see you. I wanted nothing more than to fly Emma down to Florida immediately. But I knew that would mean dealing with Marcus, and I wasn't ready for that confrontation. Emma, sweetheart, it's complicated with your parents right now. I know, they said mean things to you. I heard them. I heard Dad say he wished you would just go away forever. I told him that was mean, but he said I wouldn't understand. Hearing this from my 12-year-old granddaughter was both heartbreaking and validating. Even a child could see the cruelty in her father's behavior. Emma, I want you to know that I love you and Jake more than anything in the world. And someday, when you're older, you'll understand everything that happened. Are you ever coming back, Grandma? I don't know, sweetheart, but I want you to remember that sometimes adults make mistakes, And sometimes we have to make hard choices to protect ourselves. After that call, I spent weeks debating whether I should try to have a relationship with Emma and Jake despite their father. But I knew that Marcus would use any contact as an opportunity to ask me for money again, especially since their financial situation hadn't improved. I decided to leave things as they were, but I did set up education trusts for Emma and Jake that they would inherit when they turned 18. Marcus would never be able to touch those funds. Last month, I received the call I'd been expecting for years. Mrs. Helen Morrison, this is Dr. Jennifer Walsh from Detroit General Hospital. I'm calling about your son, Marcus Morrison. Marcus had had a massive heart attack at age 52. The stress of his financial problems, combined with his poor health choices, had finally caught up with him. He was in intensive care, and the doctors weren't sure he would make it. He's been asking for you, Mrs. Morrison. He keeps saying he needs to tell you something important. I caught the next flight to Detroit. When I arrived at the hospital, Jessica was in the waiting room with Emma and Jake. Emma, now 14, ran into my arms immediately. Jake, 12, was more hesitant but eventually hugged me as well. Jessica looked older, worn down by years of financial stress and marital problems. Helen, I'm glad you came. He's been talking about you constantly. When I walked into Marcus's room, I barely recognized the strong, arrogant man who had thrown me out of his house 4 years earlier. He was pale, connected to multiple machines, and looked fragile in a way I'd never seen before. Mom? His voice was barely a whisper. I'm here, Marcus. I need to tell you something about the things I said, about how I treated you. Marcus, you need to rest. No, Mom, please. I've been such a fool. Jessica told me. She told me how you used to slip money under Maria's door when you lived in the building. How you paid for groceries for the elderly people in the community center. She said you were never broke at all. I looked at Jessica, surprised. She nodded through her tears. I followed you one day, Helen, years ago. I saw you come out of that fancy financial planning office downtown. I realized you'd been hiding money, probably to protect it from Marcus's spending. I should have said something, but I thought you had your reasons. Marcus tried to sit up, but couldn't manage it. Mom, I threw away the most important person in my life because I was embarrassed by your old clothes and your small apartment. I never saw that you were the most generous, kind person I knew. I thought you were the burden, but I was the burden. I was the one who was broke in my soul, broke in my character. Marcus, please, tell me it's not too late. Please tell me you can forgive me. I looked at my son, my only child, lying in that hospital bed. Despite everything he'd put me through, despite the years of loneliness and rejection, he was still the little boy I'd raised and loved. Of course I forgive you, Marcus. I never stopped loving you. He closed his eyes, and for a moment I thought he might be gone. But then he squeezed my hand. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. How much money do you actually have? I glanced at Jessica and the kids, who were all staring at me intently. Marcus, I have enough. Enough for what? Enough to know that the people I love will be taken care of. He was quiet for a long moment. The people you love, does that still include us? Looking at Emma and Jake, seeing the hope in their eyes, thinking about the years we'd lost, I felt my resolve beginning to soften. Yes, Marcus, despite everything, it still includes you. Marcus survived his heart attack, though his recovery was slow and difficult. During those weeks while he was in the hospital and rehabilitation, I got to know my grandchildren again. I learned about Emma's love for science and Jake's talent for music. I saw how Jessica had matured through their hardships, becoming less materialistic and more focused on what truly mattered. And slowly, carefully, I began to let them back into my life. I didn't change my will back to its original form. Too much had happened for that. But I did set up trusts for Emma and Jake, and I established a fund to help Marcus rebuild his business, with the understanding that he would use it to employ people from our community who were struggling to find work. Most importantly, I kept the majority of my charitable donations intact. Maria had become like a daughter to me, and the community programs I supported had become my legacy. Marcus never asked me for the exact amount of my net worth, and I never told him. But he did say something that meant more to me than any apology. Mom, I spent so many years thinking you weren't successful because you didn't have expensive things. I never realized that the way you lived, simply, generously, quietly helping others, that was success, real success. Today, at 78 years old, I split my time between Florida and Detroit. I have my family back, but on new terms, terms of mutual respect and genuine love rather than obligation and judgment. Emma is starting her senior year of high school and wants to study medicine. Jake is in the school jazz band and talks about becoming a music teacher. And Marcus? He's learned to measure wealth not by what you own, but by how you treat the people you love. The 12 million secret that almost drove us apart forever became the foundation for rebuilding our relationship on honesty and true values. Sometimes the most valuable inheritance you can leave behind isn't money. It's the lesson that love and respect can't be bought, but they can be earned.